everything that can help heal your neurology, which is really everything from food, lifestyle, and medicine to nature, culture, and politics. There's no topic too big or too small. I'm Jillian Ehrlich, family nurse practitioner, certified in Ayurveda and functional medicine. And I am so pleased to have our guest here today, Jeannie Di Bon, is a movement therapist specializing in hypermobility, Ehler Danlos Syndrome, chronic pain, and getting more and more deep into mast cell activation syndrome. She has over a decade of experience in supporting clients with pain management through movement and is the author of 2 books, Pilates Without Tears and Hypermobility Without Tears, and contributes to media including Huffington Post, The Mighty, and Thrive Global on the topics of chronic illness and disability. She comes to this work honestly, rooted in the experience of chronic pain living within her own hypermobile, bendy, unstable body. Her way out was through moving inward and paying attention to subtle movements. Her formal training began with Pilates and grew to include courses on biomechanics, anatomy, neuroscience, and lifestyle medicine. From this and thousands of her own clients, she's developed the IMM, the Integral Movement Method, which is a no pain, no strain strategy of embodiment, literally being in one's body. The IMM is endorsed by doctors and physiotherapists and has helped people around the world through her books and video courses. She founded the Zebra Club online, which you can find at her website, Jeannie Di Bon, JeannieDibon.com/products/# Zebra Club. And you can find this online as a comprehensive collection of movement solutions for people with hypermobility, EDS, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, post-surgical needs, and injury rehabilitation, low back, and for other chronic pain. She continues to see clients privately, and you can find more about her and her programs at her website, JeannieDibon.com. So welcome. We're so pleased to have you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you have a real handle on the physical embodiment, the embodiment pieces of what we do. We think about fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue as systemic or metabolic issues, but really we do live in this physical body. So tell us a little bit, what is hypermobility? What are we talking about here?
Well, so the official definition of hypermobility obviously is somebody whose joints move beyond what we might consider the normal range. And recently that's been updated to say that this can or cannot cause pain, typically, because historically you were often told that hypermobility doesn't cause pain. So people were, confused and sent away thinking, what's wrong with me? Pain, I'm told it doesn't cause pain. But of course we know, and I know, being hypermobile EDS myself, that hypermobility does cause pain. So hypermobility, it's the people who can be good at yoga positions that other people might feel challenging. But there's a whole other side to that, because aside from hypermobility, as you've mentioned, we have the conditions such as Ehler Danlos Syndrome or hypermobility spectrum disorder, Marfan syndrome, fibromyalgia. So people with fibromyalgia are often found to have EDS or hypermobility as well. So there's this whole soft tissue element to it that does cause pain. And as you say, I see people in my clinic that 99% of them come to see me because they're in pain. And we look at their movement to see how we can improve that movement to help them get out of pain. And really looking at the movement and how they move and range of movement and quality of the movement really, really does help people get out of pain. So I see it every single day.
And do you see pain, when we're talking about pain, where do you see people having pain? In joints or muscles? Yeah, where?
To be honest, every single person I see is different. So it can be everywhere or anywhere. So some people have widespread pain, in soft tissue, in joints. Some people will only have it in a couple of joints. So they'll have a shoulder issue or a hip issue or an ankle issue. But honestly, every single person, and I've seen lots and lots of people, no 2 people have ever been the same. And I think this is the nature of this condition. If you're talking about EDS, Ehler Danlos, it can present itself so differently because it's a collagen-based defect of the tissue. That tissue is everywhere. Our connective tissue is everywhere. Our fascia is everywhere. So it can affect people so differently. And so it's really odd because some people, and you probably know, have peripheral hypermobility where only their sort of arms and leg joints are mobile. And some people have it all over their body, and some people only have it in their center. So as a practitioner, it's fascinating because I see all these different presentations. But as someone who has it, it's obviously very challenging sometimes to live with. And that's what really drives me, is to help people manage this condition. Because obviously that, it is a management at the moment. There is no cure. So it's how do we manage this and help people live life to the best of their ability without pain, to the best of our ability.
What are the ways that this hypermobility, what are the ways that this collagen defect can impact a life? What might people be experiencing?
Well, and people come to see me for their musculoskeletal, so it can affect obviously that system quite significantly. And you'll see things like soft, stretchy skin, stretch marks. Very stretchy skin is a trademark of somebody who has EDS, for example. So you've got that layer, which is what I deal with. But because the collagen is everywhere in your body, it can affect multiple systems. So if I take myself as an example, I have a heart issue. I've had pneumonia 3 times, so my lungs are compromised. I have digestive issues, IBS, SIBO. I have mast cell activation, which, is a new emerging, not a lot was known about that until recently, but there's a relationship between EDS and mast cell, and we're not quite sure why. So it can affect every system in the body. And I see that all the time. It's multi-systemic. So someone can come. And that's the issue we have, of course, is that people go to their doctors or their medical practitioners and they have this long list and they say, well, I have, this and this, and I have, I get palpitations and I feel dizzy when I stand up and I get these terrible headaches and I've got jaw pain and my knee hurts and I need orthotics and I've got problems with my bladder. And the doctor's like, well, the problem we've had, certainly in the UK, I'm based in London, and it's far wide, is that nobody's joining the dots. It took me 35 years to get my diagnosis, and I'm not alone. And I hear it all the time, that it takes people years and years to get their diagnosis because nobody still is looking at that and saying, that's a bit odd. How come this person's got all these different issues? But that's the nature of how a condition like this can affect somebody, because it's everywhere. And some people are very mild. I would consider myself fairly mild, despite having that long list of symptoms. I can still work, I work pretty much full time. I'm pretty functional. And of course, you have people at the other end of the spectrum who are maybe bedbound or they're in a wheelchair. It's a really vast spectrum. And that's, again, another interesting aspect of it, but also makes it challenging to manage. So, yeah, it's a huge array of symptoms that can present themselves.
And it's interesting to think about because in medicine, we're often trained to treat the disease rather than the person, where we focus on what are the criteria for this disease. And so if this disease happens connective tissue throughout the body and can present so dramatically different in different patients, then it's very difficult to formulate diagnostic criteria specific to all of these systems. And so if you're listening at home, if you are, what I see commonly, things I see commonly, I'm sure you see this as well, is people come in and they say, oh, well, these are the party tricks I can do. If you have done party tricks with your body since you were a kid, then you likely have some element of hypermobility. Yeah.
And of course, just to add on that, if you can do party tricks, I would ask that you stop doing your party tricks because they don't make things any better. I know, that especially little children, they can impress their friends by doing all these weird things. Some people can sublux their shoulders and pop them back in. I would say, please stop doing that because you're making everything weaker and less stable. So yeah, just a little tip there.
Let's talk about in your book. So your book is excellent. And
thank you.
Your information is so well organized and so well structured. I think for a bendy person, you have a very well structured book.
Thank you. Something has to be structured, right? If my body isn't, I better make something structured.
Yes. Get the good container. Yes.
Yeah.
And so let's talk a little bit about some of the things that you talk about. You talk about 6 important principles for having a body with hypermobility. And I'm just going to name these and then let's go into depth. Yep. So they include breath, relaxation, proprioception, stability, balance, and posture. So let's start with breath. Tell us about breath.
Yeah. So that's one of my favorite topics is breath. That's why it's number one. But it's number one because this is where I always start when I see people. What I've seen is that we tend to brace. We call it bracing. I think you call it guarding, where you're kind of, I call it full stability. So we kind of hold ourselves using our diaphragm almost as a stabilizer for the trunk. And so a lot of the upper body and the neck muscles, they get over recruited, they get very stiff, and you work as stabilizers. And then you're not really getting that full capacity of your breath. This thoracic spine becomes very stiff and immobile, and obviously that alone causes problems. So I like to get people to learn how to breathe. Basically, oftentimes we spend the first session just working on breath. And so many times that's when people discover these holding patterns for the first time in their life. So it can be quite emotional, because if you've held everything up here in your chest and in your shoulders and your neck for, 10, 15 years, and then somebody allows you or teaches you how to let go, it's a very emotional time, which is good because, you have to let this stuff out. Also, if you've been living in pain for many years or in fear of movement, which a lot of people with these conditions are scared to move because it hurts, or they're scared they're going to dislocate, or all sorts of things. Or a lot of time people have had bad experiences with movement. They've tried exercise, it didn't work very well, so they're scared. So we become very sort of internalized, very, bringing ourselves into our sort of center to protect ourselves, which is understandable. It's a normal response. But if you've been doing that for 10 years, your tissue has become very tight, very stiff. So letting that go, and I think we're going to talk about it later, but I call it unwinding. So you have to have this period of unwinding tension, unwinding the tissue, and just letting your body settle again. So it's all about just settling. And of course, breathing is great for the nervous system. So instant calming, a bit like meditation, focusing on the breath starts to calm the nervous system down. So that's my first principle. And it really goes hand in hand with the second one, which is relaxation. Because when people start to focus on breath and understand their breath, they instantly start to relax. And my theory of movement is that, oftentimes people are given exercises to do by, physios or whoever, PTs, but they're already so wound up, they haven't done the unwinding. So you're trying to strengthen somebody who's already in a state of muscle contraction. So unless we unwind and let the muscle and the tissue come to its relaxed state, you can't then strengthen it. You can't strengthen a tense muscle is what I'm trying to say. You've got to let it go. You've got to unwind it, almost wipe the slate clean, erase the hard drive. They can actually drop and relax. And then we kind of start again. So we start the process again. So once we've got the breath and we've got the relaxation, people start to, and it moves on to proprioception, people start to really become more aware of their bodies. And, that's at the heart of my method, is building sensory awareness for somebody, especially when you have a condition like hypermobility, because we know that people with hypermobility tend to lack proprioception. They have trouble controlling their joints. They don't know where their body is in space. We bump into things. So getting some sensory awareness, allowing the body to settle, starting to feel your own body weight is a great way of starting to work on your proprioception. And once you start working on that, understanding range of movements, how to control joints, what does a locked joint, because some people are totally unaware that they lock their joints because it's normal. They've done it their whole life. And when they actually realize, I don't have to lock my elbow every time I lift my arm up, or when I stand, I don't have to hyperextend my knees. It's a whole new ball game. So that comes under the sort of proprioception. So spending that time with the breath, noticing all those very subtle movements. It's not a mechanical process. So I don't teach exercise as such. It's not like do this exercise and you have to do it this way and it has to look like this. It's like, how does it feel? I'm always asking people, what does that feel like? What are you experiencing? Because then they start to build that internal support system. This feels good. This doesn't feel so good. Okay. And we can anchor onto the feelings that feel good.
So I want to just ask you a few questions about these things, because it's so fascinating what you're talking about. The proprioception piece, first of all, can you give listeners at home just a definition of what proprioception is?
Yes. So proprioception basically means, where is my body in space? So where are my joints? What's my body doing? So if you have hypermobility, you might be able to, if if you're lying on the ground, say, lift your arms up and put them all the way back to the floor, and they're totally flat on the floor, and it feels perfectly normal to you. So you have no real concept of how to control your arms and where they are in the body. They just kind of flop to the floor. So proprioception is really understanding how your body is moving and how to control it in that moving space. And it's a huge part of what I do.
And can you talk a little bit about interception, the internal sensing of the body, the way that, because we think about sensing as like, our five senses, what we see, hear, taste, smell, and touch. But what is interception that we feel on the inside?
So, it's really about, what's going on inside your body. And it's really interesting. This is, something that fascinates me, because we know that people with EDS, for example, have issues with that internal system, like heart rate, palpitations, autonomic system, which is all this system deep inside the body. And yet we have issues with that. And I wonder how it's linked to that interoception, that we're not aware of that. We can't control that. So, it's really that sense of, how do I feel inside? What's going on? Do I feel calm? Do I feel my breath? Am I aware of how I feel inside the body? And actually focusing inwards for a change. It's often a very new experience for people, but I think it's really powerful if you can build that for people.
For so many folks who, I think many of us are born hypermobile. And so for people who have struggled with hypermobility since early childhood, who have struggled with running or jumping or, moving the body, then sometimes the body has either not been a safe place or, you've experienced pain that you were told was not happening. And so there's ways that we learn to, I think there's ways that we self-train or is trained into us to not perceive. So, or that we don't believe our perceptions.
Exactly. There's a lot of that. If you're told that the pain can't be real, or it's in your head, or are you making it up, or, people are told, oh, you're too young to have so much pain. So if you grow up, as you say, as a child having pain, or maybe you're told they're just growing pains, but you never grow out of them. You start to doubt yourself. You start to really internalize that pain. And then we get issues like that central sensitization, where everything, I see a lot of that, where the slightest stimulation causes a disproportionate amount of pain. And how do we calm that sensitization down so that we can start to improve our sort of pain signals, and they're not sort of overfiring, misfiring for people? Yeah, it's fascinating.
It is. And that interoception piece, we do have nerve endings into many of our visceral organs.
Yes.
We were talking last week in our podcast about how they're in the external capsule of the kidney. We know that there's a ton of sensory nerves that innervate the gut, so that we can have severe pain with bloating or heartburn. We think we're having a heart attack. It literally comes as a signal like we're about to die, and it's not infrequently gas. So we do have serious nerves in there that give us what we perceive as serious messages. Yes. And so that, they also, if they're in connective tissue that is not structured, not stable, then they often will fire at inappropriate times or not fire when they need to fire. So that can be a very confused signal.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's all in that makeup, isn't it, of the collagen. It's interesting. There's new research coming out. It's not published yet, but the first research is coming out into EDS and fascia and pain. So at the moment, there's only an abstract available from the Stecco family. I don't know if you're aware of Carla and Antonio Stecco, who are very well known in the fascial world. And they've done some amazing research into pain and EDS, and it's never happened before, into fascia and EDS and pain. So that will be really interesting.
Fascinating.
When they look into that. But it's all to do with how that collagen is laid down. And it's kind of, instead of being a nice matrix, it's kind of a bit disjointed. So how is that affecting the messaging and, the proprioception? Because fascia is, the biggest proprioceptor in the body. How is it all being affected? So, that'll be really interesting when that comes out.
And a lot of those connective cells as well carry mast cells, right? So that is part of that relationship and communication. So if you're having stretchy collagen, or if it's not laid down clearly, or if it's triggering mast cells, even movement, we know that pressure, temperature changes, things that impact our connective tissue can trigger mast cell activation or mast cell release. Then suddenly we have another inflammatory signal happening within that tissue.
Absolutely. And that explains how the mast cells can affect so many different parts of the body, anywhere.
Absolutely. So breath, and one of the concepts that I love that you talked about is 3D breathing. Can you just touch on that?
Yeah.
It's so excellent.
So, it comes down to this, the fact that I see a lot of people who aren't making the most of it, maybe don't connect with their breath and because it can be such a joy. It can be such an instant calmer that people aren't getting that. So, I teach people to breathe in different positions, because then you can expand that tissue in different places. So a lot of the time, if you're lying on your back, obviously the front of your ribs, we do a bit on the side, which is really, really useful. And, maybe putting someone over a little mini barrel or something like that, so they can open up the side of their ribs, and finding that they can actually breathe into the side of their rib cage and find that expansion, again, is often a new experience. And then lying on your tummy, prone, again, quite challenging for people, because most people don't breathe into the back of their body. A lot of people are belly breathers. And if you're stressed, obviously it becomes quite shallow, sort of hyperventilating type breath. So finding that you can actually expand the back of your body when you breathe, and obviously our lung tissue is mostly in the back of our body, is quite a new experience for people, So hands-on, tactile, the days obviously when you can do tactile hearing, is really, really important, so that then they start to, when they're upright, they're functioning in real life, they can feel that three-dimensional expansion of the rib cage. And so all those muscles, the intercostal muscles, they're all getting a little massage, as they quite rightly should, every time you take a breath. And what I found, again, it's not that I've researched it, but through doing that, I've never had a client ever sublux a rib when I've been working with them. So obviously rib subluxations are quite a big deal. They can happen quite a lot for many people. So my theory is that if we're not breathing properly and the thoracic spine, the rib cage area, gets tight, and then you turn or you twist to pick something up, if you haven't got that elasticity in those muscles in between the ribs, is that enough that when I turn, I'm going to pop a rib? I mean, I don't know. That's just my theory, because what I found is that as people get more bouncy, the rib cage should have a bit of bounce to it. It shouldn't be a rib cage, It's not a cage. It's actually
You're not trapped inside of there.
Exactly. But most people, that's the wrong word, but a lot of people are. Because the ribs don't move. They just don't move. They're held with so much tension that it's wonderful to get that moving. And it's like, wow, sometimes I say I spend the first session just working on breath, and people come back the next week. We haven't done any movement. We've just done breath. And they say, oh, I feel so much better. I feel amazing. It's like all we did is work on the breath, because that alone just makes people feel better. And then you can start the movement. So, yeah. Really, really important getting that 3D breathing technique. Excellent. And easily done at home. People can do this at home. Of course, you don't need any fancy equipment.
Although certainly having, and there are probably some folks listening who will be able to, by your cueing, be able to go home and say, all right, I need to try this. I need to pay attention. But certainly having somebody watch you to say, oh, can be very helpful.
Yeah.
Well, we were talking a little bit before the show about yoga and how, you know, for hypermobile people, I was a person who was not great at sports, but really excelled from day one at yoga because I could really just lean into those joints and bend them as a fairly hypermobile person. But that I really had to be trained out of that. And so yoga is something else that should be done with attention and guidance so that you're not just relying on the bendiness of your joints as opposed to what your muscles are doing, and that you're actually finding an alignment as opposed to just degrees of fold.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it comes back to that, sensory awareness, that proprioception, because, I think yoga often gets a bad press for hypermobile people and they're told don't do yoga. But it's often not the exercise that's the problem. It's the approach to the exercise that's the problem. Pilates,
exactly.
I trained in Pilates, and there's a lot of that I would never teach to any of my clients because it's not appropriate, So it's really how we modify and adapt those exercises to suit the individual. So, yeah, I mean, I love yoga too, but in my 20s, I used to do it a lot, and I always had back pain because back then I didn't have any awareness. I didn't understand anything. Now I can do yoga. I absolutely love it because I understand my body. I can control it. I have much more, proprioception. I'm aware of my body. So I think, with the right teacher, absolutely. Yoga is a great thing.
Some of my best teachers, I went in, with pride about how flexible I was, and they would all go, "Oh, God, stop that. Why are you doing that?" And I'd say, no, this is how flexible I am and what a great yogini. And they'd say, "Oh, God, please don't."
We need more teachers like that.
Yes.
That's great.
So that gets into kind of the stiffness versus elasticity component. So we do, if folks are hypermobile or very bendy, then, we need to strengthen appropriately in alignment to find some support from our tissues, correct?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So stability obviously is an important part of it. But again, what kind of stability? Because we don't want rigidity and bracing or guarding. That's not stability. That's false stability. That's elasticity, that elastic recoil of the tissue. So stability does not mean rigidity. Stability means, like you say, being able to organize the body so that it's in a good alignment without hyperextending any of the joints. Then you're going to have a much better chance of being stable. Rather than bracing and fixing. I don't want people fixing themselves into a position and thinking they're stable. So yes, stability is the next sort of element of my method. And I don't start really talking about that to people until they've got that proprioception underway, that they kind of start to have an understanding of how the body really does move.
So it's breath, relaxation, proprioception, and now let's dive into stability a little bit more.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about core muscles and recruitment and stretching?
Yeah. So, this is probably, where I'm a little different to other people. So certainly in Pilates, the core is a big deal, and we're told to pull in our pelvic floors and our transverse abdominals, which are the lower abdominal muscles, and again, really brace or guard those muscles before you move. And that is one element that I wholeheartedly don't approve of. I don't teach it because for many reasons, and I talk about it a lot in the book, but it's, for one thing, it's just not natural, okay? We don't go around every day holding in our pelvic floors or our tummy muscles to do our everyday life, I hope. Because what I've seen, and people are taught this, we're taught that that's to protect your back. Well, your back is a very strong, organized structure. It doesn't need protecting. It doesn't need protecting. If your body is well organized and you're using it properly, you don't need to protect your back. So what I found is that people who come to see me and they've been taught to pull in this pelvic floor, hold in their tummy, they're in pain because they are guarding and everything becomes stiff. So we've got that rigidity. Now, when I teach them to stop doing that, to learn to work with the breath. So we know that the breath, obviously the diaphragm is obviously involved, but the diaphragm is also very good friends with the pelvic floor. So pelvic floor and diaphragm are moving together. Now, if you're holding in your pelvic floor while you're exercising, how is your diaphragm and the pelvic floor talking to each other? They're not. The diaphragm and the pelvic floor have to move together. So if you're holding something in, you're going to start causing this sort of weird blockage in your system, which can then lead to all sorts of issues. So people come to see me, they've got low back pain, hip pain, even abdominal pain, hip flexors are super tight, all these things because they've been bracing and guarding these muscles for so long. So I'm not a fan of the core being this middle bit in our body. I think a core comes from the whole body, a well-organized body from the feet to the head. Now, if that's well organized, you're going to find those core muscles if you want to talk about core muscles. But they don't work on their own. They don't work in isolation. They're all connected to something else. So it's a real disservice to just focus on those few muscles and think that that's going to solve all your problems, because it's not. Having a strong core, if we're talking core in the traditional sense, won't really fix your neck pain or your shoulder pain. It could actually exacerbate it. So I'm probably a little different in my views there. But there's also research to prove that, Lederman, who published the research paper on this, there's no evidence that that is actually what was meant by that original paper about core. They didn't want people to go around, start bracing their muscles. And there's no actual evidence that that can actually do more harm than good. So I think, people have to treat that carefully, I guess. That's the core.
That's the core of the core.
That's the core of the core. Yeah. Recruitment, people are told to recruit their core muscles. And I'm not sure, they're told recruit them 30%, recruit them 40%, The body doesn't work in percentages. It's a sensory organ. What is 40%? What does that even mean, it just doesn't make sense. My body's like, well, what is that? Because if you can teach, the great thing about the body is you can teach it a feeling. You can teach it anything you want and it will remember it. And it will be like, you mean this feeling? Yes, that I can do that. It doesn't understand. Your body doesn't even know what a bicep is or a hamstring is. We know that because we've learned it. And somebody, a long time ago wrote that on a sheet of paper and said, this is a hamstring, this is a bicep. But the brain doesn't know that. So the brain, why would it want to work in 30, 40% recruitment of muscles? It wants to work with feelings and senses. Like animals, really. Animals don't go round bracing their pelvic floors when they... But the children don't. Children in a playground, they don't climb on their climbing frame and say, oh, hold on, I've got to brace my abdominal muscles before I climb up. Thank goodness they don't. They move with fluidity. Yeah. And why, just because we're adults, why should that be any different? That's what I never understood. So you tell people to go to a Pilates class and do this bracing and recruitment for an hour of a class, then what? Do you do that for the rest of your life, or do you just do it for an hour when you're in your class? I didn't ever understand that. I want my body to work normally, functionally. I want my pelvic floor. I'm not saying your pelvic floor and your tummy shouldn't work. Of course they should. But they should be responding to the load that you put through your body. If I pick up a very heavy box, or try and move furniture, yes, I'm going to need some abdominal support and, my pelvic floor will probably draw up and help. But if I'm just lying on the ground, lifting my arms up and down, do I need to brace my abdominal muscles? I don't think I do, because there's not enough load going through the system.
What are the ways that we should be thinking about our bodies with a more sedentary life? Because certainly we were built to move in a certain way that I would say more than half of us no longer do.
Especially now, of course, so many people are staying at home more than we would normally, and our lifestyles, our phones, everything, they've made it more so, right? You can do everything you want from an iPhone. You can watch TV, you can order your dinner, you don't even have to get out of your chair the whole day just to go to the bathroom, and that's it. Everything's there. So the body is suffering. I hate to say it. The body is suffering because of that. Hamstrings are getting tighter, glutes are getting weaker, our cardio fitness is going down. So, I really encourage people to move little and often. And if you're in pain and you're listening to this and you think, oh, well, go to the gym and work out for 3 hours, but, have a little walk around your garden or around your street, or climb the stairs instead of, little things. Keep that tissue moving, because when you sit for a long period of time, the fascia, which is obviously made up of the collagen, is part of our connective tissue, starts to dehydrate. So when that fascia starts to dehydrate, it starts to lose its ability to glide. Yeah. So for us to move pain-free, our tissues need to glide on each other. Then you get pain. When that doesn't happen, things get sticky. Okay, so you try and move and there's not so much gliding, there's a bit of pulling, there's a bit of torsion. So that happens when the fascia starts to dehydrate. Now, the only way to hydrate your fascia is to move. So you can drink water, but it's not really going to be enough. The only way the fascia likes to be hydrated is by movement. And it doesn't matter what you do. You can sit at your desk and do a little side stretch, do a bit of rotation, whatever it is. But if you sit for 8 hours a day at your computer, your body's not going to be very happy.
Yes.
Because it's going to get sticky. And then the thing is, we go to bed and we haven't moved all day. So we sleep for 8 hours, if we're lucky, 8 hours. And we get up and we feel stiff. And it's like, well, yeah, because you haven't moved for, 24 hours or whatever. And then you go and sit at your desk again. And it just goes on and on and on. And 2 years down the line, people go, oh, I've got terrible backache. Yeah. And it's like, well, that didn't just happen. That didn't just happen overnight. That's been something that's built up for the past 2 years. So your body doesn't just unless you have a massive trauma, you fall down the stairs or something happens, you don't tend to just wake up and suddenly go, oh, I'm in absolute, that's been building up normally. Yeah, not always, of course, but oftentimes it's accumulation of lots of things.
So talk to us about balance.
Yeah, so this is the next principle in my method for hypermobility. Obviously important in lots of ways. Balance, as in physical balance. So, lots of people struggle with walking, for example, and walking is an act of balancing. You have to put one foot on the ground, take the other one off. So training people how to interact with the ground with their feet. So in my book, there's a big chapter on the feet that comes under balance, because the feet obviously are the things that connect with the ground most of the time. So a lot of footwork, a lot of connecting the feet to the ground, understanding how the feet work, really, really important. The feet are really our foundations, because every time the foot hits the ground when you're walking, it draws up the pelvic floor and contracts the abdominal wall. So that's what I meant about this whole system of core muscles. It's not just this isolated little group of muscles. So balance as in, how do I stand on one leg? How do I walk? Things like that are functional for everyday life, but also the whole balance through the whole system, the front and the back of the body, the left and the right of the body. I work a lot on that because oftentimes people may, and again, not aware of it, but 80% of their weight are going through one leg, and then they've got, hip pain or shoulder pain. So how can we bring balance and awareness to that whole structure? And then you can start to do more challenging exercises, of course, with people when they start to be able to do their balance. So standing on a wobble board or, different things, making things fun.
In your book, you mention how the feet have 26 bones, 33 joints, and 100 ligaments and tendons. Like there is so much going on in there. There are so many moving parts.
Yeah, so many moving parts. It has the same amount of joints as the spine. In theory, therefore, our feet should be as mobile as our spine and vice versa. So wherever you have a joint, it means that something is supposed to move. That's what a joint does. And yet most people have feet that either don't move in paces, or they're totally in hypermobility. Obviously, a lot of pronation, overpronation, flat feet. So the tissue has been not allowed, it's just the quality of the tissue has dropped, and that has caused the flat feet. So oftentimes by working the tissue in the feet, you can rebuild the arches and you can give people strong feet again. So the feet are fascinating. I love working with feet, because if you can change someone's foot, you can change their whole interpretation of, their whole body.
Right.
In my clinic, I have, and some of your listeners might have been on reformer machines, the Pilates equipment. There's a reformer bed. And a lot of that is obviously it's very safe because you're lying down and you have your feet making contact with the surface, and you get to do exercise in a very safe way. But when you get off of that machine and you stand up, people are like, wow, I feel so different. Because it's the first time that they've really paid attention to when you come back up into standing, they're like, wow, I feel amazing. I feel different. I feel weird, whatever they say is good, because the brain's gone, oh, this is a bit different. And that's great. That's all you want. You want them to say, I feel different. Then you've started a different pathway. So
It reminds me of in the Aleutian Islands off the coast of Alaska, the kayaks that they build were frame, and the frames were all tied with sinew, and then it was covered with skin. And so different than the kayaks in Greenland, which were, or I guess there were other kayaks that are planks, or we think of kayaks as being solid, but these Arctic kayaks all had joints, like 133 different joints, because when you went out into the ocean, you really needed to be able to flex and bend and flow so that your boat didn't crash or didn't break or wasn't crushed by waves. And so I think about the power, the pounding that our feet take.
Exactly.
We really need to be able to flex and flow with the variation that we anticipate on the ground, although that no longer happens as we walk on, wood floors or sidewalks, or we have shoes that immobilize our feet.
Yeah. So shoes are obviously, necessary, but also not great for our feet because, like you say, they're stuck in one position. And especially if you wear the same pair of shoes every day, because your feet do not experience anything else. So they kind of get stuck in the same pattern. So I like people, if they can, I know it's not always accessible, but to walk a little bit barefoot at home, just to stimulate the feet and wake them up. So it's really, really important. But the foot really needs to be sort of a mobile adapter. Mobile enough to adapt to the floor, to the surfaces that it's on, but rigid enough to have stability. So it's quite a complex structure that it needs mobility, but it does need some structure to it. So some rigidity, but not fixed rigidity. So it's interesting.
It is very complicated. It's also making me think, I saw a patient in clinic this week who has neuropathy in his feet, and his balance was somewhat poor because when you can't perceive the bottom of your feet, we think of our balance as coming from somewhere in our head or our ears. But it's really, you have a mind in your feet that is perceiving and sending the signal.
Absolutely. The foot almost has to open up into the ground to receive the information, and then it sends that force back up through the legs, through the pelvis, all the way up the spine. So there's always an opposing force pushing us back up. Otherwise, we would just be collapsed on the floor all day.
Yes.
So, and the foot is that structure that pushes that information back up.
Yes.
Which obviously it can't do very well when you're in shoes. But, what can
especially
you do?
high heels. Let's talk about how terrible those are.
Very bad. Very bad. For lots of reasons, aren't they? But we've all worn them. I've been guilty of wearing high heels.
Yes.
But boy, do my feet hurt afterwards.
Yes. We're on to the last component of your program, which is posture. So talk to us about posture and this. I love this word tensegrity. So talk to us.
Tensegrity. Yeah.
Yes. Such a pretty word.
Tensegrity. Yeah, it's awesome. And now it's become biotensegrity as they apply it to the body. But I'll talk to, because probably that's quite, again, a new concept that maybe people haven't heard of, but I think it really explains how the body organizes itself. So in my book, I say that, posture, I don't believe is something that I can teach. It's because I could say to someone, stand up straight, pull your shoulders back, lift your chest, whatever. But it's just a mechanical information. So you would do it, but you would walk out of my clinic and you would go, oh, goodness, I can't hold on to that. That's terrible. It really hurts. It's hard work. So it would never last. So posture has to come from inside. And I see that it kind of emerges. The more that people work on their body and they work on proprioception and balance and all these elements come together, this posture starts to change. And that's really great because then it's with them forever. Their sensory system has understood where their head should be in space, where their feet are, and then they've got it forever. You'll never lose it because it's not something that someone said to you, do this, do that, So posture is kind of the last element because it brings everything together under one umbrella, okay? And I was saying this new concept of biotensegrity is really, and it's like those toys, you might have seen children's toys. I don't even know if they're called tensegrity toys, but have you ever seen those toys that have like wooden struts and then they're joined together by elastic kind of cables and none of the wooden struts touch each other? but it still maintains its shape. So if your listeners Google tensegrity, you can see amazing structures like bridges and architectural things that are made in a tensegrity model. And it's really amazing to look at. So yeah, none of the pieces in these structures are touching each other. So it's really fascinating. And so the new theory is, and there's a whole book on biotensegrity if anyone's interested in reading more about it, is that the body, we always used to think that the body is stacked and bones were stacked on top of each other. But that again gives you that idea of rigidity, that we're stacked. So what this new theory is saying, the bones are not touching and there's this internal pressure and it keeps the bones apart. So that gives you that sense of fluidity. So the fascia is kind of expanding. So we're not linear, right? We don't just go up and down. We're multi-directional. The fascia works in spirals. And so everything is expanding out of the center. And that's what holds us up. It's this pressurized system. And it's fascinating. And so I see posture as that. So the feet are being drawn down, but there's this force coming up. And then there's forces coming out of the sides of your body and diagonally across your body. And so it's everything. It's not just your bones being stacked one on top of the other. It doesn't work like that. So yeah, it's a fascinating subject. And I say there's a whole book on it if people would like to read up on it more. And I definitely Google and have a look at some of the tensegrity buildings out there and architectures, because you'll really understand what they mean about things being strong, which we are. Bodies can be strong and stable, and yet things don't have to touch. Inside our body, we have spaces, and those spaces are causing this sort of pressure. So, yeah, it's really interesting. The book would explain it. The guy who wrote the book would explain it a lot, in a lot more detail than me. But hopefully that gives an idea of this concept.
Who's the author? Do you remember the author's name?
I think, yes, David is a book on fascia. Graham Scarr, exactly. Okay. So he's the author of this book on tensegrity, and it's a really interesting read if anyone is interested in looking into that. He talks about the fascia, and yeah, it's very interesting. But it's a new concept. It's not proven as such, but it totally makes sense if you look at the body in this way.
So we've talked about your 6 principles: the breath, the relaxation, proprioception, stability, balance, and posture. And tell us about the components where you've put this all together into your integral movement method, the IMM. Talk to us about this.
The method, as the name says, it really looks at the body as a whole. So it's integral. So, it's not another part of the body. So it really takes that into account. And the first element of it, which I spend a lot of time on, is what we call unwind. And we talked about this earlier. This idea that if you've been in pain or you've been, traumatized or you're stressed, we hold tension in the body. It's normal. And then what I help people do is facilitate the unwinding of that tension, make them become aware of it. And then they start to move with this sense of letting go of that tension. So the next step is explore. And I really like the word explore, because it's not like you have to do it perfectly. So I want them to just, if you're lying down, just explore lifting your arm up and down or moving your leg, or, it's not necessarily doing an exercise, but what does it feel like to just lift your arm without that tension? So I get people to start to move about without that idea of being tense. But then, of course, what will happen is typically the body will remember its old pattern. So it might start to tense up again. So then we have to pause and we have to kind of assess and say, what's going on here? So we look at it, we reassess, and then we start moving again. So it's all about reinforcement, because if you carry on, the body will never learn that we don't want you to move in that old pattern anymore. So we pause, we look again, we say, am I still breathing? Oh, no, I've stopped breathing. Oh, I've tensed up my shoulders. Oh, whatever it might be, everyone would do something differently. And then we try again. So we move again. And we go through this cycle where you constantly pause and stop to reassess and then refine it so that you eventually break that old movement pattern. And hopefully you have this new one that comes from a different place. So it doesn't come from fear or stress or fear of movement. it comes from this place where you've explored, you've experienced movement without that tension in your body. Mm-hmm. And then you can move on, because once you become softer, I talk about being soft, mm-hmm. rather than having hard edges. I mean, I say that for a lot of my life, I felt I was very hard. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean hard as a person. I mean, I felt my body was hard. It had hard mm-hmm. surfaces because I was holding it with such rigidity and tension mm-hmm. that I didn't know what softness was. Now, when I discovered what softness was, I found a freedom of movement that was just amazing. And so I like people to try and experience this idea of softness so that we move without that rigidity. So the IMM is really taking them from one movement pattern, which might be led by fear or pain, and taking them to a softer place as their feelings, and hopefully come out the other side feeling, more connected with their body. And that's really what it's about, is feeling that real deep connection about where movement comes from and how it feels. And hopefully movement is something to enjoy, not to be feared, because it's such, it's such a shame to have that fear of movement mm-hmm. Deep inside your head. So it is possible to reprogram that, and people start to enjoy movement. They start to take up sports and, activities that they thought they couldn't do anymore, which is wonderful, Mm. So, yeah, that's the kind of the stages. It's a kind of a cycle. So in the book, I put it in a sort of a circular diagram because it's constant. You're almost peeling an onion constantly, because you'll take off one layer and then maybe another fear or another stress is there. And it's like, okay, where's that coming from? What can we do to strip that layer back? And then we strip another layer back. And it's very gradual, and it's at the person's own pace. And and that just brings you deeper and deeper into your body, which is really, really lovely.
And this is going to be, of course, iterative across seasons. So when you put thicker shoes on and,
yes.
Tighter pants, and when you then start wearing lighter clothing or sandals in the summer, and then of course across the ages. So as your body changes, if you've mm-hmm. had accidents or injuries, if you've delivered babies or carried babies in pregnancy, if you've, however you get a new job and suddenly you were sitting for 8 hours and now you're standing behind a desk for 8 hours, or now you're moving, or now you're in your car. So there is really no end to what we have to listen to that occurs in our bodies.
Absolutely. It's constant, It's constant change. And I think that's right. You wouldn't want things to be stuck.
The sunset is a new sunset every day. So if we can see its beauty one day, there is the potential to see its beauty and pay attention every day. And that's, I think, what makes a good life.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the body, the body and mind has so much to offer when it's sort of tapped into in the right way. But we have so many of these beliefs, these sort of inner beliefs and beliefs about our abilities or ourself or pain or whatever it might be. And those really hold us back. So if we can break those down however we can, and I do it through movement, and, there are lots of other ways of doing it.
So what you know and what you offer is an incredible service, because what you're really helping people do is get to know their own bodies, this real intimate relationship with this body that we live inside of. Can you talk to us a little bit about, if people are curious and want to know more or want to access your services, what are all the ways that they can do that?
There's lots of ways, actually. So I have a YouTube channel where every week, every Thursday, I do release a video on tips and information on how to move. So little 3, 4, 5-minute snippets. So if people just want to consume little bits and learn a little bit more about how I, explain things and talk through things, that's an easy way to do that. So if they just subscribe to the channel, they'll get a sort of a weekly video. And then obviously, as you mentioned, I have my 2 books, so Pilates Without Tears and Hypermobility Without Tears. So that Pilates Without Tears really goes into the method in detail and talks about Pilates in how I changed and modified Pilates. Hypermobility Without Tears is very much about hypermobility and EDS and how I work with people with those conditions. And then I have obviously my website, which is jeanniedibon.com, and the Zebra Club, which you mentioned earlier, which is, my baby. I'm very, very proud of it. It's, growing every month. We have over 80 classes available at the moment. And honestly, if people have a look on my Facebook page, I'm on all social medias as well. If people want to follow me and read about, again, I'm always posting ideas and exercises and things. But, the testimonials on my Facebook page really speak for themselves. Facebook has a number of reviews about the Zebra Club and what goes on in the Zebra Club. So there are lots of different ways. I do Zoom consultations as well, if anyone wanted to speak to me in person, because I have clients all over the world, which is great, really fantastic. I get to meet hypermobile people all over the world, which is brilliant. Lots of different ways that they can connect with me. And as I say, social media, YouTube, obviously all free resources. And even the Zebra Club, although it's a paid resource, I do try to keep it really, really reasonable for people. I think it works out at like 40 cents a day or something. And obviously it's online, it's access 24/7. So it's really, it comes, from my heart, this work. And I try and make it affordable for people as well. So, I've tried to think of all the different ways for people to sort of get what they need, whether it's video content, books, or, face-to-face. So, there's lots of different options.
One struggle for my patients has been to actually find a physical therapist trained in working with hypermobile clients. Do you have any recommendations, or do you do any trainings? Great.
Yeah, well, I do trainings of therapists and teachers. They used to be in person, obviously, before COVID. They were physical courses. Now they're online, some of them. I would love to have a directory of people, but I don't have that at the moment. I do know that on the EDS Society website, I don't know if you know the EDS Society, they have a health professionals directory, which people can register on. So that is people who are EDS trained or aware of EDS. So it's a good place to start. Obviously, it's a global directory. So I've recommended that to a couple of people, and they've actually emailed me back and said, "Oh, thank you. I found a physical therapist and I'm going to see them tomorrow." So, you might get lucky. There might be someone in your area. But as far as I know, that is the only place where you've got a listing of different professionals. And, we're still growing and learning because, as you probably know, EDS has been neglected for so many years. And so people in medical schools and things, they weren't taught about it. People out there who know what it is and how to deal with it, sadly. But, we keep pushing, we keep trying, and keep spreading awareness as best we can.
Excellent.
But that's an area that we need to work on, is getting more people trained in it and aware of it or willing to learn about it.
And we were talking a little bit before the podcast also, I have my one theory, totally unproven, that I think that there is some component of pollution and stress that interrupts collagen production or collagen organization, that when our immune system is so distracted by the inhalation of microplastics in our every breath, that somehow collagen doesn't lay down correctly. And so I do think that as just like mast cell, I think we're going to see more and more collagen disruption and more systemic dysfunction.
Yeah, no, but I think, there's, as we were talking earlier, I see it all the time, and it's a well-known fact that things often get triggered in times of stress or trauma. Why is that? What is it about a stressful incident that suddenly triggers the symptoms of EDS? People are fine. People come to see me and they say, "I don't understand it. I was running marathons, I was hiking mountains, and now I can't even brush my teeth without pain. I mean, what's going on?" And something happened, and so a light switch went chung, and that was it. Something flipped and their life was turned upside down. Now, why does that happen? There needs to be more research into that. But stress, is it, like you say, pollution? There's so many people with chemical sensitivities and light sensitivities and, weird sensitivities, but they have EDS as well. Why is that? What's going on? So there must be something in it. I agree with you, but we definitely need more research.
In our clinic, we use a lot of Ayurveda to help the body heal and to help the body kind of put itself back together. Sometimes we talk a little bit about cell danger response and the mitochondrial impact of perception of threat, and that if the mitochondria can't kind of come to find a steady, stable kind of back to zero from the threat, then symptoms can persist ongoing. And Ayurveda can be very helpful for that. But we do, we need, in the meantime, before we kind of figure that all out or before that becomes available, we really need more of you in the world talking to people about listening to their bodies, paying attention, building awareness, building skills, finding relaxation, unwinding, etc. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. That was lovely. Very far-reaching discussion there. Lots of different aspects. That was amazing. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me again.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you so much. You have so much to offer. You've given us so much today to work with. Even starting with that simple piece of, if you are listening to this, wherever you are, take a deep breath into the back of your body. All of those components are things. This is a podcast that surely people can listen to over and over, and follow along, and then track your videos and join the Zebra Club.
So.
So thank you for listening today with physical therapist Jeannie Di Bon from London, coming to us from London. We've got lots of ways to continue this conversation through Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can get more information from and about her at her YouTube site and her website, jeanniedibon.com, JeannieDibon.com. And you can find more about us at our website, centerforhealingneurology.com. Please be sure to share the show with everybody you know, and especially those who are hypermobile, who don't like sports, who hide in the woods instead of running the mile in gym class and PE. And be sure to review, and we welcome your rating wherever you get your podcasts. Feel free to send your topic requests to podcast@centerforhealingneurology.com. And we love that you've joined us today to discuss how to make our whole world medicine. We rise or fall together and are committed to doing what we can to make as many of us as healthy as possible. And this takes all of us, including you. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.
Partyfish Media acknowledges that it operates and records on indigenous Duwamish and Puget Sound Coast Salish land that is still home to the Duwamish tribe. This land is stolen in violation of the Point Elliott Treaty of 1855. We are committed to uplifting the name of these lands and community members from these nations who reside alongside us. For more information on this land, its people, or ways you can help, visit duwamishtribe.org or realrentduwamish.org.